open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Scott and Jim Waters.
And welcome to this Tuesday edition of Kentucky's Voice. I'm Jim Waters, in with you each Tuesday from 11 to noon. And we're here every day, 11 to noon. We have some great co-hosts, and Andrew Cooperrider will be on tomorrow, and he'll have a great show. Dr. Pearson yesterday, and Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Debbie Robbins will be with you on Thursday and Fridays. And so we're glad you're making this part of your day. We'd like to hear from you, whether it's an issue we're talking about here or one that we should be talking about. I want you to text me today on the Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970. And you can also make a one-time or monthly gift or help support this work. It's a listener-supported effort, and we need you. You are Kentucky's Voice. It's not just our voice. It's our collective voices together standing up for conservative values. This is a conservative, Christian-based, common-sense media outlet and pushback against corporate legacy media that oftentimes just doesn't report what needs to be reported or does it in a very biased and slanted way. But when you come here, you know you're going to get it from a conservative perspective and a common sense perspective. And you know what? I'm convinced that most people in America are center-right. This is a center-right country. So we want to hear from you, 502-571-0970. Well, today, there are only 5 days, counting today, five days remaining in the Kentucky General Assembly, which is a 60-day session. Of course, they spread those days out. The weekend doesn't count. And they're also going to take a break for veto period for the governor to veto, and then they'll save themselves a couple of days, the legislature will, to come back and override Governor Beshear's vetoes, which they will, all of them, no doubt, because the Republicans have a supermajority in both the Kentucky House and Senate. So we're going to look at what happens in these remaining days on this show and some of the bills that are moving, some that haven't moved that should, some that have been filed this year that maybe we could see some movement in future years. It's not too soon to be talking about those. Most bills don't pass the first year they get filed in the legislature. But anyhow, today is an important day in Frankfort in the Kentucky General Assembly because this is really the last, if I can say, normal, traditional day that the legislature will meet. They'll have a day tomorrow they'll meet for concurrence, and that means that they will take bills that pass the House and the Senate, but there were changes made by either body, and when changes are made to a bill, it has to go back to the original body in order for there to be agreement. So in other words, both the House and the Senate have to agree on any changes made in the bill, any amendments made in legislation before it is sent to the governor's desk, before it passes. If they can't agree, it doesn't pass, even though a version of the bill passed both the Kentucky House and Senate. And that happens sometimes. But I expect this year that most of the bills that need concurrence or need discussion, they'll get there. They'll have agreement on some form of the bill, and we'll talk about that. Of course, the big bill for this session is, of course, the budget bill. This is a budget session, and there will be, of course, there are differences in the House version of the budget and the Senate version of the budget. The Senate version spends more. I'm generally opposed to that type of thing, and I think you should be paying attention to what they're going to spend on and need to let your legislator know what you think. By the way, you can let your legislator know anytime what you think. You can pick up the phone and call them right now at 800-372-7181. That's 1-800-372-7181. Even if you don't maybe know who your particular representative is, you can call that number and give them your address. They will get the message to your legislator, and whatever that is, whoever that might be, both the representative and the senator, and you can let them know what you think about these bills. But coming up, the left is having a total meltdown about immigration in the European Union, of all places. And we're going to talk about that, and also immigration legislation filed in this year's General Assembly. There were several bills. Are they going anywhere? Stay with us on Kentucky's Voice. Well, welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for staying with us today. We want to hear from you, 502-571-0970. And I'd like to hear especially about immigration issues today. I want to talk a little bit about those, and I haven't had a chance to really drill down until this show today on what's happened legislatively with some of that, and I thought I would update you in this show today. But first of all, let's take a look at what's happening in all places of the European Union. The left is having a total meltdown over this.
Something historic just happened in Brussels.
And it is adopted. So Okay.
This is the chamber of the European Parliament, the same parliament that for decades lectured sovereign nations about the importance of open borders and human rights. And just literally days ago, it voted to begin mass deportations throughout the continent, Trump style. The same institution that called Europe's patriots far-right extremists, the same institution that labeled concerns over mass migration racist, the same institution that's been punishing nations like Hungary and Poland for refusing to open up their borders, that institution just voted by a huge margin to do exactly what those patriot leaders have been demanding for years.
And so this is the European Union here. We've been saying it for years on this show, though, that, in fact, since we started this program, Kentucky's Voice, more than 2 years ago, we've been saying it, of course, that America must secure our borders, and we must deport those who are here illegally, especially criminals. But the truth is, folks, that all illegal entrants are lawbreakers. And this is something that even Republicans, the establishment in both parties, certainly have resisted talking about and have refused to acknowledge many times in the debate over immigration policy. But the fact is that even the elites now in Europe, and the European Union has been about as left and woke as you can get, but now they're getting the message because they're seeing what's happening in America, and they're also looking at the problems they're experiencing because of immigration. And part of that is a large, growing Muslim population. There's a real fear about that. And so now we have this historic shift in Brussels where the European Parliament has voted on a very conservative immigration policy, a Trump-like border security policy. But it wasn't that long ago that this body was lecturing the world about the need for open borders and how, and many of these same people were calling border concerns and those who had concerns about borders racist, and they were shaming conservative leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orban and punishing Hungary and Poland for protecting their people and trying to secure their borders. Now they're voting for the same thing that they criticized before, mass deportation, Trump style. The vote wasn't close, 389 to 206 to approve what they call the new returns regulation. It's a sweeping new framework to accelerate deportations across all 27 countries in the European Union. Wasn't close. This is a center-right vote. This is right-leaning groups uniting and getting a clear victory here. It will be the toughest mass deportation policy in Europe in over 100 years. I think this is pretty amazing because for years, the EU has ran on kind of a managed chaos policy. Illegal migrants, mainly from North Africa, many from the Middle East, they got deportation orders, sure, but nothing happened. They ignored them, and there's been no enforcement of those policies. In fact, the research shows that only 1 in 5 of folks in the EU who received deportation orders actually left the country. 80% of them just simply ignored the orders through endless appeals, delays, bureaucracy stacked against enforcement, and making it difficult to enforce these laws because of woke, leftist, liberal, progressive policies, and not liberal in the right way, liberal in the harmful way to countries, to their economies, to their populations, to their cultures. The result was, quite frankly, a skyrocketing Muslim population in many cities. It transformed neighborhoods. There's rising crime, not just the Muslim issue, but just rising crime in general, with, quite frankly, daughters afraid to walk home at night, afraid to walk home from work or school, wherever they may be. And the citizens were told in the previous approach by the liberals and the progressives and the wokists that if you want law and order, that makes you a bigot. Where have we heard that before? We've heard that in this country. And now it's all cracking. This is a failed globalist experiment that is cracking. And it's the same kind of spirit and same kind of philosophy that we have seen in this country from socialists like Mamdani in New York and his ilk, and the collectivists who want to say it's not compassionate to have a border policy. It's not right. Well, what about folks who have experienced crime at the hands of illegal immigrants, which it's been a huge problem? What about folks who have seen their cultures and their societies and their neighborhoods completely changed and completely lost in many ways? What about them? Where's the compassion for them? Where's the concern for them? Now, this new returns regulation by the EU has stricter rules. For one thing, migrants must cooperate with removal, or they can be detained in prison up to 24 months, especially if they're considered a security risk. In other words, to this point, even if a migrant in the European Union country was arrested or taken into custody or captured, they were out in very short time, a day or two. Now they can be in prison for up to 2 years. And if they've been deemed a security risk, they'll definitely not get released until they've been deported, basically. Now, there's another aspect of this here where the European Union is going to really imitate what the United States has done. They're going to create return hubs, what they're calling return hubs, outside the EU. These are processing centers in third countries. So in America, we have the remain in Mexico approach, and that's what this is. So Germany, Italy, Netherlands, others, they're already talking with African nations. Italy, under Meloni, as conservative there, has already pioneered this model of enforcing immigration policy. And then if they catch somebody, an illegal immigrant, who is already being deemed a security threat at a certain level, they're never going to be able to come back ever in their lifetime. So it's happening. Now, interesting, some of the countries within the European Union, which took this woke approach on immigration previously. Germany, for example, they now have a center-right chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who announced plans to repatriate upwards of 800,000 Syrian refugees over the next 3 to 4 years. He's prioritizing the deportation of those without legal status or those who have committed crimes. Now, does this not make sense? Is this not common sense? Is this considered a racist policy because you want to protect your country from criminals? And if you entered a country illegally, that's a criminal act. And the fact is that there's increasing amount of research that shows that if you're willing to break that law, you're willing to break other laws. If you're willing to break minor laws, if you're willing to commit a misdemeanor many times, you're on your path to committing more serious felony crimes. Now, in Germany, the amazing thing about what's happening there with this is Angela Merkel's own party who had an open door policy. This is actually a reversal of her 2015 policy in which they pretty much opened the doors of Germany and they saw 800,000 Syrian refugees come. What possible benefit to their country could 800,000 refugees from a war-torn country like Syria, from a place where terrorists hide among the people, what possible benefit could that be? Now, if this was an immigration policy we're talking about that was looking at, hey, you've got to demonstrate, if you can demonstrate that you're going to be productive when you come here and you're willing to go and take the legal means of coming here, that's a different conversation. But the fact is these people didn't do that. They just came and they ignored the laws, they broke the laws, and many of them are security threats, and they're finding out more and more of them are. And so the big picture here is that Europe is following America. Europe is following Donald Trump's America when it comes to immigration policy. And President Trump's strong border policies, his deportation focus, they have reshaped the debate, not only in this country over immigration, but really around the world. And Turley even made the point later on in his podcast there that we heard a clip from, and he said it right, I think. The Overton window has shifted. In other words, the Overton window is not only what you want to do or what you as a policymaker desire to do, but what is politically palatable, what is politically possible. And he says that this has shifted when it comes to the immigration debate, that previously what was called far-right extremism is now mainstream. So let's just point out here, there's a good reason for this policy in terms of security, in terms of risk. Uncontrolled migration, illegal immigration undermines safety. It undermines the culture. It undermines wages for working families. We've talked about that on here. It undermines the national identity. Now, in case, and we've heard a lot of Bible being quoted, by the way, about immigration policy, and I want to talk about that in a moment when we come back in our next segment. But I believe nations have God-given rights to defend themselves, to preserve themselves, to protect their borders, and we'll talk about that. But what is real compassion as well when it comes to immigration policy, and what is Kentucky doing in terms of legislation about immigration? We'll talk about all of that coming up right here on Kentucky's Voice. We hope to hear from you today. 502-571-0970. What do you think about this, what's happening in Europe following Trump's America? After all the wokeism we heard before, stay with us.
Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us today on Kentucky's Voice. I'm Jim Waters. Glad to have you here with us until noon today. By the way, you're listening to this live on 970 WGTK and across our social media platforms. It's streaming live. You can watch this show on WBNA Channel 21 if you're in the greater Louisville media market there, and pick it up on WBNA at 12:30, 4, and 8 o'clock today. 12:30 this afternoon and 4 this afternoon, 8 o'clock this evening. And we hope to see you there on television. Same show, but you get to see us and you get to follow us that way. Whatever way you choose, there's a lot of options here. We believe in giving conservatives options here because we need all the pushback we can get from conservatives in our state regarding the liberal corporate press that many times just doesn't delve into these issues or doesn't really give a conservative perspective, sometimes doesn't understand it. Look, I think we saw that in the first debate by a Louisville TV station with the Republican U.S. Senate candidates last week, where really the moderators and the questioners didn't really at all, it was apparent, didn't understand the conservative issues, didn't understand what was happening, the dynamics of what was happening in the race in terms of issues, in terms of what should be priority, in terms of discussion among the candidates. And so we need Kentucky's Voice for that reason as well. We need folks who understand the conservative perspective and will prepare and deliver content to you from that perspective so that you can take that and you can have confidence in that. It's got credibility, and it'll also give you some things to think about and things to talk to your legislators and your representatives about. One of the things we're talking about, our major issue on this show today, is immigration, and we heard how the European Union now is following Trump's American immigration reform policies with some get tough border security and deportation policies and enforcement of those policies, and also things like looking to other countries to stop illegal immigrants before they get into some of these nations. There are 27 countries in the European Union, and now they've voted overwhelmingly to protect their borders and protect their people. And that's what we've got here in America with this president, protecting borders, protecting people. Now, this issue, immigration, is an emotional issue. And that's why this is so controversial at times in the approach that's taken, because I think there is a misunderstanding about what compassion really is and what the right policies really are and what America's all about. And look, I get it, but every time we make policy decisions, especially decisions that are going to bring about a sea change in our society, like immigration reform is doing and will continue to do, every time that we make those decisions based on emotion and not based on research, not based on fact, not based on common sense, not even based on what we observe happening right before us, that's when we get some really bad policy, and bad policy always produces bad outcomes and bad results. And so it's a tough policy because America is a nation of immigrants, because everybody that really came here, or most people, unless you find your ancestry in Native Americans here, pretty much everybody else came here at one time as an immigrant. But what we're talking about is illegal immigration. We're talking about criminals and people in other countries not having a respect for our law. And look, if you break a law, you're a criminal. If you break our immigration laws, you're a criminal. And if you come here because of that and you begin to mooch off our benefits and you begin to benefit from the hard work and the investment that Americans have made in this society, and you aren't at least returning that, you're not productive, you're not investing in that, but you're a criminal if you come and break those laws in the first place. But certainly if you're on welfare, if you're not productive, that our founders wanted immigration policy that resulted in people coming here and contributing to our society, contributing. We saw that, for example, during World War II, when there were scientists from the Axis countries like Germany, like Japan, like Italy, like other communist countries that came here in some cases during the Cold War. And they were scientists, and they brought with them a knowledge of science that we didn't have, that contributed in some ways oftentimes to our victories in war. And so did they contribute to America? They contributed to saving lives. Yes, they did. They contributed to our society becoming the most powerful, most productive, most prosperous society in the world. And they had a part to play in that. But they didn't come crossing the border illegally. They came here as legal immigrants. And the friends I have who are here legally are the biggest advocates for the kind of immigration reform we're seeing from President Trump. Now, has it been messy at times? Yes. It's not always been smooth and easy, and it's not going to be. It's a tough issue to deal with. But I do not want Syrian refugees here that we don't know anything about. I don't want populations from these Muslim-dominant countries that we don't know anything about. Now, someone who comes here legally and we know who they are and they're productive and they're visible and they're paying taxes and they're good citizens, then that's a different story, but still they must come here legally. And that's the big sticking point with a lot of people here. And then we have division even within the Republican Party about what is right and what is Christian. Is this a Christian policy? Are we being unchristian? Are we somehow other being hard-minded and without feeling and without concern for these people? Well, I don't think so. But it doesn't help when you have a state legislator standing up in the legislature condemning the policy that now other countries are copying. In fact, Europe is following that. In large print, they've made that their blueprint for immigration reform. But we've had those even in our state legislature who have stood up and really kind of chastised the Trump administration. Let's hear that clip.
So we're caught in a bind. We've got people that are here illegally. We have a need for those people to be here. The criminal element needs to go, no question. Mr. President, I hope there comes a day soon that the federal administration draws a line in saying it's time to tone this down. It's time to look at those who are remaining in the country. If they've been here 2-3 years, they're productive citizens, they're contributing to our economy, let's give them a path to stay in this country. Let's tone all this rhetoric down on the left and on the right, and let's do the right thing. When you look up here, it says, "In God we trust." And over the last few weeks, and I'm not going to attempt to preach any kind of sermon, but I've been coming in early, reading the Bible. I had no anticipation of getting choked up on this, and I apologize. In Matthew, it talks about treating others, even your enemies, those you hate, treating them with kindness. I think we're forgetting that right now, where we are as a country. And I think that it's time for us to go in a different direction. And do we need to tighten up our borders? Absolutely. But wouldn't it be great that while we're doing all these enforcement efforts and we're removing illegal immigrants, that we create a path for some to stay, and then we celebrate streamlining an immigration process to get those immigrants here that we need. But we do need to tone it down and not forget the folks that are here that are not a criminal element and why they're here and the purpose of the actions that they took.
But why are they here, right? Why are they here is not the issue. The fact that they're here illegally is the issue. And if you're going to say it's uncompassionate to enforce the law, where are you going to draw the line on that? We'll talk more about Senator Carroll's comments from Paducah. I respect him, but he's wrong about this, and we've had this mixed message for way too long. We'll have a clear message when we come back.
kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us here on Kentucky's Voice today. Jim Waters in with you. You're listening to this live on 970 WGTK. Hope you'll join us on TV this afternoon, 12:30, 4 and 8 o'clock this evening, and also across social media. Follow us live as we stream right here on Kentucky's Voice. Love to hear from you today, 502-571-0970. We've got some texts coming in. We'll get to those on the Kentucky's Voice text line. What do you think about what's happening, the European Union copying Trump's immigration policies? And if you would have told me just a few years ago, even a year ago, that this would happen in the European Union after how they slammed conservatives for being bigoted and racist simply because they want to defend their borders and they want to have secure borders and they want to have a sovereign nation and they want to protect their people, I would have said you're crazy. But this is the impact that Trump has had in terms of that policy, which he's made his signature policy of this term as president. Now, we heard Senator Carroll before the break, Senator Danny Carroll, who represents Western Kentucky. He's a former law enforcement officer. I think he was a state trooper, and we heard him waffling, and this is the problem. And he was waffling. Now, look, I think our Republican legislature has done a good job in many ways. They certainly, when it comes to our economic situation, they made great strides and great improvements. But I also know that this show, we have to hold politicians accountable, or else we don't have credibility to speak on these issues if we're giving somebody a pass just because they're in a particular party or even because we like them personally. And so this is a criticism of Senator Carroll, and not just of him, but of this whole establishment fear of taking a stand on an issue like immigration. We heard that waffling back and forth. Yeah, we know people are here illegally, but we've got to find a way for people who are here legally and who are productive to stay here. We've got to find a path to citizenship, and it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And they don't like it because Donald Trump, a strong personality who is not a waffler, and agree with him or not, and there's issues I don't agree with him on and haven't agreed with him on, but he's not a waffler. I mean, I don't agree with President Trump on his attack on Congressman Massey. I just don't. But I know where he stands. There's no question about where he stands and where Congressman Massey stands and where Ed Gallrain stands. And so there's no issue with as far as what their stance is. We may disagree on what that stance says and what it is, but there's no waffling on that. And we've heard a lot of waffling on immigration policy because I think people are, and I've looked at this too, and it's a big issue. Like, we've got all these millions of people now who are in this country. How are we going to send everybody back? How are we going to deport everybody? Well, President Trump is trying basically to do that. And then you have the senator talking about biblical. We've heard the governor talk about this as well. Are these things contradictory? Is it contradictory to want to secure our borders, keep our people safe, have a legal system by which people can come to this country? Is that in contradiction with biblical principles? And I don't believe it is. I believe the Bible has given nations God-given rights to their borders and to preserving their nations. Look at Israel. There weren't open borders there. When you became an Israelite, you had to go through a certain process to even become a part of that people, and they protected their borders. Now, they could have enlarged their borders in the biblical times, but that's a theological discussion for another day. But Israel was a nation. God recognized a nation that had borders to the east, the west, the north, and the south. And they do to this day. And, of course, they are surrounded by people who largely in countries who want to destroy them. But there is no doubt about where the borders of Israel are and where those end and where the nations that want to destroy them begin. So there's no biblical precedent for saying that a policy that protects our immigration laws and that respects those and upholds those and enforces those is somehow unbiblical or unchristian. It's just the opposite. Acts 17:26, the scripture says, he hath made of one blood all nations of men, and hath determined the bounds of their habitation. That's very much talking about borders and nations. So are these things contradictory? Is it uncompassionate for America to have a border policy that says no to people who want to come here? And in another part of his speech, Senator Carroll said, well, you know, if I was in another country and he said, I've visited these places and there's lots of poverty, there's lots of lack, there's not opportunity there, and I had a chance to come to America like this, I would. And so, in other words, he's saying I would break the law to do it because of the dire need that I have to take care of my family and to offer them something better. Now, I get the argument, but it's not an argument in favor of borderless nations or of open borders. It's not, because that's not the only concern here. There are concerns about the security of this country. And the Bible talked about how there would come a time even among Israel when foreigners would come in among them and would wreak destruction on their country because they weren't known. Nobody knew who they were, and they didn't know why they were there. So this is a wrong-headed approach, and our governor's made the same thing about, well, my Bible teaches me to love all people. So is it possible to support border policies, secure border policies, and also love people? Absolutely. And I'll tell you what real compassion is, folks. Compassion is helping people in their own countries as we do. No one has done more to help other nations than America has. I mean, even our enemies. I mean, if there is an earthquake in Iran somewhere today, I guarantee you the American Red Cross, the American people will pour out their hearts and open their wallets and their pocketbooks to help them. We're always the first, even in countries that have wanted to destroy us. We have set the tone for that. So don't give me this about America not being a compassionate country. 80% of the world's missionary work goes out from America. Why do you think the enemy hates America so much? That's why. He wants to destroy, because he knows the impact we're having on other countries. So real compassion is finding ways to help people through legal channels. Real compassion is not being a lawbreaker. The scripture talks about being a lawbreaker. If you enter this country illegally, you're a lawbreaker. And open borders create chaos that harms citizens and that also harm those who are here legally. Did you think about that? People who are here legally, who've gone through the process, who've learned the language, who've learned what it means to be a citizen here, they're harmed by these open border policies as well. And a point that I think is right to be made here, and you're going to disagree, some of you will, but open borders erode the Christian influence civilization that built this country and built the West. The rule of law, family security, moral order, it creates chaos. And so this is important for Christians to know, that it is not contradictory to say we want to enforce the law, uphold the law, but we also will show people compassion. You can do both. We'll love people. I think of another example. There's been some discussion during this legislative session in Frankfurt about the death penalty. Pardon me. Is it possible to have a death penalty, a law that is designed to deter people from the most violent, heinous criminal activity that you could think of, to discourage people from murdering others, from taking the lives of others? Is it somehow or other uncompassionate to have that policy, to enforce it, to execute those who have clearly broken this law? Well, if it was, then God himself is uncompassionate, because they had the same kind of laws in Israel. Our judicial system in America is set up based on the Jewish law and based on the tenets of that law, which was, if there were witnesses, if there was evidence, if it was irrefutable, if it was without doubt, and there was no doubt about this, then that was part of the law, that people who took a life, that their life should be taken. And we don't even really do that for people who take a life. We do it for people who do it intentionally, who plan it, who are heinous about it and who are especially violent in that way. And so is that, how could you tell the family of the victim that it's not compassionate to have that type of justice in our society? But that's really what you're saying. If you're saying we can't enforce our border laws, that we have to allow anybody and everybody over here. 502-571-0970 is our Kentucky's Voice text line, and I'm all for people coming here legally. If they've proven they'll be productive and they'll invest in our country, they'll make it better. Let's have them, and let's have them come through the legal process. But it is, don't call me uncompassionate, don't call me racist, don't call me a bigot for wanting to protect my borders. Even the liberal, woke European Union is wanting to do that because they know that that's the way to protect their people. All right, this off our text line. Trump tells NATO to buy oil from the U.S. or go get your own. That's how a leader defends his own country. I'm sure Spain and the UK didn't see that coming. But there again, this is strong leadership. And look, we've got a lot of people in this mamby-pamby society, we've become soft, that are opposed to strong leadership. They're opposed to people making definitive decisions. And so I'm going to say thank God for a leader like Donald Trump versus what we would have had. Can you imagine Kamala Harris in office at this time? Can you imagine the disaster that she would have been with some of the issues we're facing with Iran, with the immigration policy, with the energy needs that we have? Can you imagine that? And so thank God that we have a leader who's not perfect, but who could make a decision, who doesn't have a problem, who doesn't waffle. There's no waffling when it comes to where does Donald Trump stand on immigration? Where does Donald Trump stand on important issues like school choice, like spending, like tax cuts? Where does he stand? Has it been perfect? No. But has it given Americans more opportunity? I believe that the policies that we're seeing implemented today will end up creating more opportunities than we know right now. There's always a lag in the policy. You implement a policy, it always takes a time for it, especially positive ones, especially ones that are going to benefit our nation. You know, I think it was right for Trump to tell NATO, help pay your own defense. We've paid for it long enough. I mean, America has carried the free world. America has led the free world. And this is just another example of this. I'll tell you, real leadership is when someone else imitates what you're doing. And we see that in the European Union. How amazing is that? All right, what's happening in the legislature this year with immigration bills? We'll touch on that when we come back. Stay with us here on Kentucky's Voice. 502-571-0970. Let us know what you think about what's happening with immigration or any other policy right here. We'll read it on the air. Have a great. Why did I say have a great? We're here for our final segment of Kentucky's Voice. Jim Waters in with you on this Tuesday, beautiful day, and just glad to have you with us. And we want to hear from you on our Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970, talking immigration today, especially after the European Union passed a Trump-like immigration policy plan overwhelmingly. The vote was not close, and they're saying, hey, we've got to protect our borders too. We're seeing the need to do that. We're seeing how America's doing this, and we're going to follow their lead. That's true leadership, folks. And this off our Kentucky's Voice text line today, and I'm getting to those. Don't let illegals vote until they've been here for at least 18 years. I'm glad you brought this up to the texter, because I wanted to make this point on today's show. There is a reason why the woke left and the leftist and the Democratic Party, and particularly the National Democratic Party, are so upset and opposed to immigration reform, because they want to grow their number of voters, and this is so they want people here who really don't know the culture, who really don't know what's happening politically, and aren't savvy politically, and can be influenced easily, because many of them come in and they are given handouts. They're on welfare systems created by Democratic policy, created by leftist policy of the past, and so that creates more of an opportunity for more of those who favor those kind of policies, who favor big government and big spending at your expense, who care nothing about showing compassion toward the taxpayer. Whatever happened to compassion toward Americans here who have to pay the bill here, who are trying to take care of their own families, and yet they're being seized on, and their bank accounts are being lowered and lessened and dried up to support policies that support these illegals. So yeah, if you want to, I think at the very least, you should be here 18 years. I agree with that with the texter, before you can vote. Now, if you come in here legally, then we're going to have a problem doing that, because if a person's a legal citizen, then the Constitution gives them the right to vote, and you would have to change the Constitution. I don't know that there would be a lot of appetite for that. Hear this also off our text line today. Senator Carroll, who we heard his comments about how the tone needs to change. But, I was thinking about this, and I get it. It's an emotional, controversial issue, but there's no other way to say it. If you're here illegally, you need to go. We're gonna send you back. What other way is there to say that? Now, you might disagree with the policy, but there's no other way to say we're going to send you back because you're here illegally. And if you want to come here, you're welcome to come legally and to go through the process. So when it comes to the tone, what does that mean? Change the tone. What does that mean? What he wants is for us to soften our position, but he puts it in terms of changing the tone. And that's what we hear a lot of establishment politicians talking about. This texter also said Democrats just want new voters to replace the blue-collar class, which they have lost. Interesting point there about getting more Democratic voters. The reason we're in this situation is because many of the policies of the past have caused the blue-collar jobs and opportunities and blue-collar middle-class families to disappear. You can't stop people, he said, from breaking the law, but you can choose to enforce the law. So how do we tone that down? Do you consider that to be a statement that is not compassionate? If we say you can't stop people from breaking the law, but you can choose to enforce the law, is that an uncompassionate statement? What would you have if you didn't enforce the law? Would you want your daughters walking home at night in a society that doesn't enforce the law? I certainly wouldn't. Would you want your family at risk because we don't support the law or we don't enforce the law? I wouldn't. And texter says, I believe if you have been a green card holder for 5 years and cannot comprehend basic English, you should be deported. That's another thing we see, is it not? That people who come here should learn the language. If you can't learn the language and you're not willing to try to learn the language, then you need to go. and this is for all Uber drivers, by the way. Learn the language. I don't know how many Uber cars I've gotten into, and I've had to speak into their phone because it translates into their language, and it could be one of a million languages here. And I say, how long have you been here? 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And they can't even speak any basic English because they just don't want to. They think somehow or other it's a badge of honor to come into our country and then not speak the language. Now, even if you came here legally, you've got to you've got to learn the language. You have to assimilate into our culture. And then when it comes to this whole decisiveness about President Trump, his decisive nature, his ability to make a decision. Thank God for his ability to make a decision. This texter said, I vote for fallible leaders, not preachers or priests or pastors. I vote for fallible, strong leaders, not a preacher or a pastor. That's what I said. We elected a president, not a pastor. All right, this off our text line as well. By the way, at 502-571-0970, we've got a few minutes left. If you get your text in, I'll try to get it on the air. This texter says it's a sad look for a once really great group, the Tea Party, to whine about big money donors. You sound like a Democrat. You're embarrassing yourselves and conservatives. Okay, that was not what we talked about today, but I'll tell you this. A lot of people who complain about these types of things, I have to ask them, what are you doing to help elect conservative candidates? What are you doing to give to candidates? Are you giving? Are you doing? Are you campaigning? Are you in a grassroots organization helping the right candidates get elected? Is there information available about how many illegals are in the metro and in Kentucky? That's a good question. I'll work on that and get back to you on our next show. How many different ways do you tell a child to not touch a stove? Plain and simple, the word is no. Okay, so that's right. So is it compassionate to allow a child to touch a hot stove knowing that if they do so, it's going to hurt them? Is it compassionate for a nation not to enforce its border laws, knowing that if we don't, we have open borders, we're going to have criminals come in, we're going to have murderers and rapists and violent people come in who are going to try to take away our country, take away the prosperity, the liberty that we've had, because there are different ways to take away liberty. One is to elect communist or collectivist leaders or socialist leaders who take away your property, take away your things, and infringe upon your First Amendment rights to speak and to believe what you want and to speak it how you want. But that's not compassionate. We wouldn't say that's compassionate. That's not the right policy. But there's also that's one way of taking away liberty. But there's also if you can't go outside your home because the laws aren't being enforced against violent criminals, that's also taking away your liberty. Even if there are laws on the book, if they're not being enforced, that's taking away our freedom. There are different ways for that to happen. It's just like you wouldn't let a small child touch a hot stove without trying to warn them, at least without trying to prevent them from being harmed. And that's a really good point, I think, from our Kentucky's Voice text line, 502-571-0970. And love to hear from you. We've got a couple of minutes left. Now, in Frankfurt, there have been several bills filed. There's at least 10 bills, immigration-related bills filed during this session. Most of them are going nowhere. The one bill that is moving is Senate Bill 104, and this requires anyone within 25 feet of a first responder, including ICE agents, who stay there after being told to move back could be guilty of a misdemeanor on the first time and escalating penalties after that. So that bill, that is the only bill moving in the Kentucky legislature, Senate Bill 104, that is related to immigration, and it is more about ICE agents trying to do their job. So this protects immigration enforcement agents trying to do their job, and it protects them from people who want to create mayhem, create chaos. And that's the one bill. There were two bills that had leaders on board as co-sponsors. You've got to understand the legislature. If the leadership's not behind a bill, it's not going to get out of committee. And most of the immigration bills have not gotten out of committee. There's been several bills filed, and Representative Shane Baker has, in fact, filed a couple of bills that I think are important and we need to know about them. House Bill 186 would limit local offices like the mayor, those who want to serve as mayor, city council person, fiscal court magistrate, a school board member who want to serve on soil and water districts. They would have to be natural-born U.S. citizens only. And House Bill 259 would propose a constitutional amendment extending similar restrictions to nearly all state-level offices. So if you want to be governor, attorney general, you want to be a legislature, you want to be a judge, you would have to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. You could not be a naturalized citizen. You could not hold dual citizenship in two different countries. You would have to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. That bill is really going nowhere. It's died. Both those bills have died in committee. The leadership has not really signed on in terms of being a co-sponsor of that bill, which matters. If you're in the legislature, your chances of getting a bill passed would be much better. Another bill that is not going anywhere that should be, it's in the Transportation Committee, would be House Bill 70 that would require voters to show citizenship status in order to vote. And it would also require new or renewed state IDs and commercial driver's licenses. They must denote whether the holder is a U.S. citizen or non-citizen. That's what that is. And then you would have to show that, I believe, when you vote. So very little time left for these bills. This is really the last normal day of the legislature. They'll take time off after tomorrow's session for a veto period in which the governor will decide whether to sign or veto bills that both bodies have passed and agreed on. And then the legislature has saved itself a couple of days to come back and override those vetoes. That's the way it works in Frankfurt. That's where we're at. And thank you. This has been a good discussion today. Thanks for the text and the opinions about legislative policy. We've had lots of bills filed, not going anywhere. Not unusual for bills filed their first time around, but we need to work on this for the next session and see what kind of immigration reform we can come up with as a state to support our citizens here and to protect our way of life. Thank you for joining us. Kentucky's Voice. Be with us again tomorrow. Andrew Cooper Ryder here at 11. God bless you.